Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the National Education Policy 2020 and the debate surrounding its integral component 3-language policy. Then, in the second article, we'll talk about the increasing instances of human-animal conflicts and the ways to mitigate them. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2025, along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Now, coming to the very first article of the day, this is with respect to the National Education Policy and one of its key integral component, that is the 3-language policy. Now, for years, what we have seen is that the state of Tamil Nadu has always pushed the attempts of the center to impose Hindi as a medium of education. And this article also points in the same direction, where you have Tamil Nadu Chief Minister who has said that his government was against this particular policy as it was detrimental to the interests of the students and for the state at large. So see, what we'll try to do is we'll try to look at this particular picture comprehensively. And we'll first have a discussion with respect to the National Education Policy 2020 because it seeks to comprehensively overhaul the education system of the country. And then we'll look at this particular policy, that is the 3-language policy. And then we'll also look at the kind of way forward which is needed. Now, this is a part of GSU, Social Sector Education. Now, talking about the National Education Policy 2020. But first, let's go into the history and see whether there have been other education policies as well. So if we look at the history, what we can see is that it was in 1968 that we had the first policy, national policy on education. Now this was on the basis of the recommendation of a particular commission, which was chaired by Daulat Singh Kothari, right? So the commission was set up from 1964 to 68, and ultimately we had this particular first policy, which was the National Policy on Education 1968. Then we had the second one in the year 1986 under the Rajiv Gandhi government, which was then also modified in the year 1992. And ultimately, we had the National Education Policy 2020 under the chairmanship of K. Kasturi Rangan, right? Which basically talks about all the aspects of the education, be it the primary education, the secondary education, the higher education, senior secondary, all the aspects, right? So it seeks to comprehensively look at this particular education system. Now, what is a very objective of the National Education Policy 2020? It seeks to basically tackle or cater to the evolving development needs of India. What we are trying to say is that, see, as we are having our own path of development. There are a lot of socio-economic challenges that we are facing. Then we also have the bombardment of different technologies, right? What we call as the Industrial Revolution 4.0, right? Where we have, let's say, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, different technologies, automation. So we need to have that kind of skilled workforce with us, which is basically able to handle these disruptions in the society, right? Also, what you must know that not only it tries to talk about these comprehensive aspects, but it also tries to talk about the regulatory and the management aspect of the education also, right? Now, this, as I said, that it seeks to overhaul the education system in the country. We have already gone into the background, the historical background. Now, what are the objectives when we talk about the pedagogy, right? The very first is that it seeks to promote a learner-centric teaching. That is, it is taking into consideration the need and aspirations of the student, right? Second, it focuses upon the discussion-based teaching. That is, it should not be a monologue. Rather, it should be an interactive mode. Second, delivering the value-based education. Inclusion of value system in the overall education. For example, we have the ethics paper in the civil services. That is what we are trying to include, that value system in the aspiring civil servants. Then next is developing the multidisciplinary thinkers. That is, we are trying to look at a particular issue from different angle, from different dimensions to develop those critical analytical abilities, right? Next is developing the creativity so that we can focus upon the innovation aspects. Next is discovery-oriented teaching so that we can also focus upon the scientific research or the social research. Next is developing the critical thinkers so that we look at a particular issue with proper rationality, right? Next is developing the decision making so that the decisions are based on proper logical principles so that we can have more informed decisions. That is what the pedagogy aspect is. Now, if you look at the salient features of the National Education Policy 2020, the very first is universal access. See, whenever we are talking about the universal access, what we are trying to have, the aspiration of the National Education Policy is to achieve the universalization of secondary education in the country, right? Next is shift to a system of 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. See, as of now, we are having the system of 10 plus 2, right? Through this particular policy, we are trying to transition to a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 system, where we specifically focus upon the early childhood care and education, right? That is one of the most important aspect. Next is multilingualism. Now, this is what we are also talking about, the crux of today's article, that we are trying to focus upon different languages. We should not just focus upon a particular language. We should give adequate importance to different languages. Next is inclusive education. That is to provide a level playing field, irrespective of the backgrounds of the candidates. We are focusing more upon socially and economically disadvantaged groups, right? SEDGs. Next is the GER, gross enrollment ratio enhancement. Whenever we are talking about this policy, there is a particular aspiration that the policy is trying to enhance the gross enrollment ratio in the higher education from 26% as of now to 50% by 2035 in the higher education. Next aspect is research focus. Research not just related to the STEM, what we call as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but also the social research, which is very important, right? Next is language preservation. There are many languages in the country which are on the path of becoming extinct. Yes, you heard it right. We're talking about some of the languages where the speakers are very less, and those languages are becoming extinct. So we should try to focus upon this aspect, and this is emphasized in the National Education Policy. Next is internationalization. What do we mean by that? That we should collaborate more with the international universities or institutes so that we can basically learn from their experiences and then incorporate their learnings into the Indian education system. Next is enhanced funding. See, as of now, we have the funding, the public funding in the education, it almost stands to the tune of 3% of the GDP, which is quite less. The aspiration is to increase this amount, 3% of GDP, to almost 6% of the GDP. This is what the aspiration is. Next is the Parak Assessment Center. The problem in India's education system is that we look at the assessment very narrowly, right? We are not looking at the assessment holistically. So that's the reason we have a new form of assessment, which is the performance assessment and review and the analysis of the knowledge for the holistic assessment, right? That is what the Parak Assessment Center is all about. Next is the technology integration. Not just, see, we are witnessing the integration of technology in different domains, be it manufacturing, be it the services. Now, what we are trying to say is that there has to be adequate technology integration in the education also, be it through the computers, be it through the other skill initiatives. Next is Gender Inclusion Fund. That is so that we can have more parity with respect to the genders, right? More equal field. Next is special education zones. Whenever we are talking about the special education zones, we are trying to say that we will focus more upon the disadvantaged groups or those regions which are lacking behind. So these are some of the salient features of National Education Policy. Now, see again, if you just look at this particular area, these are the different thrust areas. For example, multidisciplinary and holistic education, then skill development and employability, capacity building of teachers for quality education, equitable and inclusive education. You can just have a look. Now, what are the prospects of the National Education Policy? That is, if we try to implement it in a full-fledged manner, 100%. What can be the prospects? The very first is it would lead to the holistic development of the overall education system in the country. That is, right now what we are focusing upon is a system based on merit, right? And many of the scholars, especially when we study scholars in political science, they have said that merit is a system, what we call as the meritocracy, which basically gives birth to social discontent or resentment among the people, right? So we should transition from this merit-based system to a more holistic aspect, right? And therefore, it should be beyond the rote learning. We should focus upon the critical learning abilities. We should focus upon the logical reasoning in the candidate, the cognitive development, right? Next is the complexities of the 21st century, as I already mentioned. Now, what we are seeing is we have the bombardment of different technologies. So we need to make a workforce ready. We need to make our workforce future jobs ready, right? And for that, we should basically try to have those aspects in the education which help them to excel in these fields. Next is improved equity and inclusion, very important. If we'll have this, the realization of the National Education Policy, it would lead to more equity and inclusion, right? What we are seeing right now is that only few sections of the society are able to access quality education. So we also have the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 4, which talks about the quality education. So this should be for every section of the society. So we are focusing upon the early childhood care and education. And also we have reports by Pratham, right? In its ASAR report, Annual Status of Education report, has said that if we focus more upon the early childhood care and education, definitely it can lead to better cognitive developments among the students, right? And therefore it would definitely lead to a better workforce. Next is focus upon mother tongue instruction. This is also specified in the Constitution of India. So we have Article 350A, which clearly says that the states should provide adequate resources so that we can have learning at the primary stage in the mother tongue. That is what the Constitution also talks about. Next aspect is the expansion of the right to education. See, right now, the right to education 2009 only caters to the students between the age of 6 to 14 years. What we are trying to say is that if we follow this national education policy, we can even expand it to 18 years, right? That is what the NEP is talking about. Next is skill development for employability. Many of the industrialists and many of the reports, including this particular report which I have cited, the World Bank data, says that there is a mismatch between the kind of learnings we are providing in the institute and the demands of the industry. There is a mismatch between these two things. So we need to make a workforce. We need to provide those kinds of skills to the students so that they are ready for the future jobs, right? And therefore, what is important is to provide them industry relevant skills. Even the World Bank says that the kind of education system we have right now in the country, it is not in a condition to cater to more than 75% of the future jobs, right? So what we are trying to say is that the kind of system we have right now, it is not actually in a condition to basically deliver more than 75% of the future jobs, right? Next aspect is that of empowering the teachers. See, what we need to understand is at the base lies the teacher, right? Because we need to make our teachers understand the intricacies, the complexities of the Indian education system, and then make them skilled so that they understand the system and then they can proceed further, right? And it is for that reason that the National Education Policy has proposed a 4-year integrated B.Ed degree program. Now, what are the challenges in the implementation of NEP? The very first is implementation hurdles. See, a country like India has a lot of competing priorities, be it the education, be it the health, be it the defense, be it the other sectors. And we have limited resources since we are a developing country. So to have those kinds of resources to the tune of 6% of the GDP is a very big challenge. Next is political will. As we are seeing in this particular article, there is a need for a strong political will, right? Because strong actions, if you want changes to take place, you need to have strong actions. Next is collaboration. Now, this is very important. Education is something where participation of different stakeholders is needed, be it the central government, be it the state government, or be it even the municipalities. So over here in the same article, what we are witnessing is that because of the confrontation between the central government and the state government, it is ultimately the students whose education is being compromised. Next is the emphasis on privatization. See, since the state does not have enough resources of its own, definitely it would call in the private sector. And once the private sector would come on board, definitely they would charge more fees. And this would not be affordable. This would not be affordable for many sections of the society. And therefore, there is a very serious concerns with respect to the accessibility and the affordability of the education. Next is centralization of power. What we are seeing is that through the national education policy, the center is trying to give the directives to the states for various aspects, which is obviously something which is against the very principles of federalism, right? Next is the digital divide. Many of the aspects in the national education policy are based on technology integration. But what we see is that there is still this issue of digital divide, where there is no access to the smartphones in the rural areas, right? And therefore, this aspect is difficult. This aspect of integrating the technology is difficult. Teacher training and recruitment. As the National Council for Teacher Education has also said, that first we should try to focus more upon the teacher training and skilling. Then we should focus upon the students. We should make our teachers more aware with respect to the kind of issues we are facing in the education system, right? Next is shifting the mindsets. We should not just focus upon the students. We should also focus upon the community. So as I said, that the kind of thinking we have is still rooted in that system of merit, rooted in that system of rote learning. So we need to transition from this rote learning system to a more holistic system where we focus more upon the extracurricular activities, or we focus more upon, let's say, the critical aptitudes, We go focus more upon the reasoning aspect, not just the rote learning, right? Now, coming to this particular article, we have the context is that we have the union government which has withheld almost 2000 crore for the Tamil Nadu under the Samagra Shiksha scheme. Now let's first talk about the Samagra Shiksha. See, we had the union budget of 2018-19 which basically clubbed different schemes so as to provide one comprehensive scheme for the overall education system, right? So we just look at this. We have the union budget 2018-19 proposed to treat the school education holistically without the segmentation from the pre-nursery to class 12th, and therefore we had the clubbing of different schemes, be it the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan or the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan and the teacher education. This is what the Samagra Shiksha is all about. Now, in this particular case, we have the Tamil Nadu government who has refused to join the Pradhan Mantri Schools for Rising India scheme, right? Now, this particular scheme, if you just talk about the scheme, what it is trying to do is it is trying to make model schools which are not just focusing upon the learning aspect, but which are also focusing about, let's say, the developmental needs of the child. Let's say the nutrition needs of the child. Let's say the extracurricular needs of the child, right? So it is trying to provide a more holistic aspect, not just the education, not just the learning process. So it is a centrally sponsored scheme by the Government of India. Initiative is intended to develop more than 14,500 PM Shri schools managed by the central government, state, UT government or local bodies, including the Kendriya Vidyalayas and Navodaya Vidyalayas, in which every student feels welcome, this is important, and cared for, while a safe and stimulating learning environment exists, where a wide range of learning experiences are offered and where good physical infrastructure and appropriate resources conducive to learning are available to all the students. So we are trying to make model schools so that the other schools can also learn from these schools and then try to incorporate or integrate these learnings, right? So this is what the PM Shri is all about. Tamil Nadu is ready to basically accept this particular scheme, but there's a condition which is imposed by the center, that you'll have to also accept the national education policies guidelines, which include the 3-language policy aspect, right? So the key point of contention is the 3-language formula in the national education policy, which Tamil Nadu strongly opposes. Now, what does the NEP 2020 state? See, for this, we need to first go to the 1968 National Education Policy. Now, the 1968 National Education Policy, what it said was that for the Hindi-speaking states, they should basically focus upon one language, which is the modern Indian language, preferably a South Indian language. Second, the Hindi, and the third, English. What it said for the non-Hindi speaking states was that they should basically go with a regional local language. Second, the Hindi, and third is the English, right? So this was mandated. It was basically something which was fixed. But what the National Education Policy 2020 has done is it is giving a more flexible framework, right? So the National Education Policy 68, Hindi compulsory in the non-Hindi speaking states, while the 2020 version, it allows for more flexibility. The National Education Policy 2020 states that 2 of the 3 languages must be Indian language. Students can choose the language and Hindi is not mandatory. And this was especially after, we had Tamil Nadu strongly opposing the recommendations of the first draft of the National Education Policy 2020, right? Bilingual teaching, that is in mother tongue and English, is encouraged. And this is very important aspect, that Sanskrit as an optional language should be emphasized. Now, what is Tamil Nadu's opposition to the National Education Policy 2020? For this, we'll have to go back into the history, right? Now, this is not an issue which has just come up. It's a very long issue. It's a very old issue, right? So there has been a lot of resistance from the Tamil Nadu with respect to the imposition of Hindi on the state, right? So long-standing resistance to Hindi opposition. So what happened in 1937 was that we had the government of the C. Rajagopalachari in Madras, which basically said that there has to be the mandatory inclusion of Hindi for the secondary education. Again, I'm repeating, in 1937, you had the government of the C. Rajagopalachari, who said that there has to be the mandatory inclusion of Hindi as a language in the secondary education. Led to a lot of protest, and therefore, in fact, 2 people also died, and therefore, the government of C. Rajagopalachari had to resign, what we call more commonly as Rajaji. The government had to resign. Next aspect is, what you need to see is that the Constitution of India, for this we'll have to go into the article per se. We have Article 343, which provides for the official language of the Union. It says Hindi in Devanagari script has to be the official language. But it also provides English as an official language for a period of 15 years from the commencement of the Constitution, right? From the commencement from 1950 till 1965. The third clause says that the Parliament is also authorized to extend the usage of English as an official language. So when this deadline was actually approaching, 1965, what we saw was that many people in Tamil Nadu thought that Hindi would be imposed, and it led to a lot of protest, right? Major anti-Hindi protests around 1965, violent agitations and casualties. More than 70 people died. Then what happened in 1968 was that the first DMK government, which was headed by CN Annadurai, basically passed a resolution to scrap the three-language formula, removed Hindi from schools, right? So it was the very first government in 1968 of DMK, Dravida Munnetra Kazham, headed by CN Annadurai, which basically came up with a resolution and said that Hindi would not be used in the state of Tamil Nadu. And then, since then, Tamil Nadu started following the two-language policy, which includes one language as Tamil and the other language as English. Now, what you need to understand is, if you look at the regional politics in Tamil Nadu, we have the DMK as well as its opposition, what we call as AIDMK. Both, they have the same insistence on the language aspect. So both believe that there should not be any imposition of Hindi in the state, right? So they have historically opposed the three-language formula. In 2019, what happened was that we had the first draft of the National Education Policy, and this was chaired by K. Kasturi Rangan. Now, this Tamil Nadu strongly revolted. Initially, there was no flexibility involved, and therefore, after the deliberations, what happened was that this committee came up with the conclusion that in the National Education Policy, we'll provide the flexibility, and there would not be any mandatory imposition of Hindi as a language. So it dropped the mandatory Hindi clause from the draft NEP, right? Now, why the three-language formula is seen as Hindi imposition? The very first is, we have different political activists and parties in Tamil Nadu which are saying that, see, you are not making it mandatory. We understand. You are giving the flexibility. But this is something which is a smoke screen. You are providing a backdoor entry to impose Hindi in our state. Right? Why they're saying that is because they have their own reasons. For example, if you were to practically implement this three language, what it would inevitably lead to is the imposition of Hindi as a language. Second, what they say is that the center provided almost 50 crore rupees in 2019 to appoint Hindi teachers in non-Hindi speaking states. But it did not do for the other languages. Why is that so? Why you are biased for Hindis, as the political activists in Tamil Nadu say, not provided the similar support for the regional languages in North India. Next, what they say is that the Kendriya Vidyalayas lack the sufficient regional language teachers, reflecting a bias towards the Hindi. So we all know that the Kendriya Vidyalayas, they come under the jurisdiction of the central government. What they are saying is that you don't have adequate teachers for other languages in the Kendriya Vidyalayas. So this reflects your bias. Now, what the union minister has said is that, see, three-language formula is something which is non-negotiable. You'll have to accept it. And he has criticized the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister, Mr. Stalin, as saying that he has a kind of myopic vision towards the NEP to 2020, which he says, the education minister says, is very comprehensive, seeks to comprehensively overhaul the education system in the country. What has been the Tamil Nadu's response? The CM has said that the center attempting to impose Hindi under the guise of NEP. That what the CM is saying is that you are actually not implementing the NEP. You are trying to basically impose Hindi in the guise of NEP. Next, he has taken a vow that as long as he is heading the government in the Tamil Nadu, Hindi would never be imposed. So these are some of the political considerations. But again, for the explanation, for the sake of explanation, for the sake of understanding the issue, I basically deliberated upon this aspect. Now, what should be the way forward? See, the very first is that there has to be a constructive dialogue. Why we are saying it? Because we already discussed that education is something which requires a lot of stakeholders. It cannot be a top-down approach. It cannot be something which is being imposed by the center. We need to have a consensus, and for that, dialogue is something which is necessary. So again, what we can say is that there is a need for a differentiated approach for different states. See, different states have their own needs and aspirations. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach, right? So there has to be differentiated approach. There has to be a decentralized approach. Next aspect is that education is a part of concurrent list. Now, this was moved from the state list during the emergency. Now, you need to tell me the constitutional amendment. Which was the constitutional amendment which basically moved the education from the state list to the concurrent list? Now, both center and state must cooperate, as we have just told. Tamil Nadu's two-language policy has proven successful. See, one more aspect is, when we talk about a particular policy, you need to go into the evidence-based policy making. You need to actually see whether the policy has given the results or not. Tamil Nadu has been following this two-language formula of Tamil and English. And it has substantially given a lot of good results, right? So if you compare the education parameters in Tamil Nadu with that of any North Indian state like UP or Bihar, definitely what you would see is that Tamil Nadu has high gross enrollment ratio. It has low dropout rates. So we cannot basically negate this aspect that the two language formula of Tamil Nadu is actually something which should not be used. Next aspect is that of Samagra Shiksha scheme. What we are trying to say is that for those schemes, for a scheme like Samagra Shiksha, which tries to look at the education system very comprehensively, holistically, including the primary education, the secondary education, senior secondary, higher education, what you need to focus upon is that this scheme the funding should not be withheld, right? So there should not be any arbitrary withholding of the funding for these schemes, just because a particular condition has not been fulfilled by a particular state. So this should not be done. There can be other penalties, but there should not be a complete stop to the funding mechanism. So what we are trying to say is, definitely, see, we need to focus upon the individual needs of different states, because different regions in the country speak different languages, and it is better for the children to basically learn in their own mother tongue. That is really needed. Definitely there needs to be the learning of more languages. Different states should basically adopt the other languages in their curriculums. There's no doubt about it. Hindi can also be a particular language, and this flexibility has itself been provided in the national education policy. But it should not be an imposition. What we are trying to say is we need to have a more decentralized approach, a more differentiated approach, and the decision has to be taken on the basis of consensus. It cannot be like arbitrarily withholding the funding mechanism. So this is what you need to learn from this article. Let's have a mains practice question. The question says, the National Education Policy 2020 aims to promote multilingualism through the three language formula, yet it has faced strong resistance from certain states, particularly Tamil Nadu. Critically analyze the merits and challenges of the three language policy in the context of India's linguistic diversity and federalism. Also suggests a way forward to balance the national integration with regional linguistic aspirations. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question, and yes, do not forget to like if you're liking the initiative, and we'll continue to provide you the enriched content. Let's go to the other article. So coming to the next article, this is with respect to human-animal conflicts. So what we have been witnessing is that with the rise in human population, there has been the expansion in the human habitations. And this in many cases has led to the confrontation with the wildlife, which in many a times has led to the death of humans and also the death of the animals because of, for example, the retaliatory killings. Now, this is a particular concern which is very serious, and this is a part of GS3 Wildlife and Conservation. So what we'll do is we'll first try to see that what this concept or what this issue of human-animal conflict is all about. What are the different reasons for it? What initiatives have been taken by the government, and what should be the way forward? Now, human-animal conflicts describes a situation where you have the struggles that emerge when the presence or behavior of wildlife poses a threat to the human interests. So in this particular definition, we are taking the human at the center, and then we are actually describing a situation where a particular animal poses a threat to the very human interest, and this ultimately leads to a lot of negative impacts on the people or on the wildlife to the extent of the death of the people or the wildlife. Now, this usually occurs in those areas where you have the constant interaction between the humans and the wildlife, right? So it occurs in areas where you have the wildlife and human population, and there is overlapping between these two. Now, the management of the human-wildlife conflict, it is primarily the responsibility of the respective state government or the union territory. And therefore, it is for this reason, for example, you have Kerala, which has declared the human-wildlife conflict as a state-specific disaster, shifting the responsibility to the State Disaster Management Authority. Now, if you look at the numbers, the numbers of people who are actually being killed in these cases is actually rising. Again, the same reason, because it's not just about expansion of the humans habitations. It's also about the other extractive industries. We look at the reasons. So if you just look at the numbers, almost 606 people died with respect to the elephant attacks in the country in the year 2023-24, and almost 82 people died with respect to the tiger attacks in the country. So this number is quite huge. Now, what are the key drivers of human-wildlife conflict? The first is ecological drivers. What it means is, let's say you have a particular change of season. Let's say the transition is taking place from summers to winters or from winters to spring, right? So in this transition, what usually happens is that you see a movement of the animals. And in many cases, the in the course of the movement, they interact with the human habitations. It leads to the anxiety among the people as well as the animals, and ultimately you have these instances. Natural calamities, for example, let's say you have flood in a particular forest, or let's say you have the instance of landslides. So ultimately what would happen is the animals would come out into the open areas. Next is weather events, the same. Let's say you have heavy rainfall, that can be a source of the animals coming out in the open. Melting sea ice in the Arctic has increased the probability of negative human polar bear interactions. Next is anthropological drivers. What are the reasons which are attributed to the humans? The very first is changes in the land used, causing habitat loss. Again, what we are saying is we are expanding the human habitations, and what we are doing is we are deforesting a lot of lands which are actually lush green forest areas, right? Also, it can be because of the expansion of the agriculture. We need more food. So in order to provide that food security, we are expanding the agriculture areas, or it can be with respect to the infrastructure development. Let's take the case of the North Indian states or the Himalayan states, where we are having the strategic projects, right? So that ultimately leads to the destruction of the forests, and then in many of the cases these animals come out from the forest areas into the human habitations. Or it can be because of the extractive industries. Let's say in a particular area, forested area, there has been a particular study and it came to the conclusion that there are a lot of coal reserves. So coal mining can take place. This would lead to the destruction of the forest areas, and therefore ultimately the animals would come into the human habitations, and there would be more interactions, negative interactions between the humans and the animals. Urbanization, linear infrastructure, for example, we have the laying of roads or highways, extractive industries. Then wildlife drivers, changes in the animals' life cycles, be it the biological life cycles, movement patterns of animals, or presence of invasive alien species. For example, in a particular area, let's say you have the sudden growth of invasive alien species. So the species who were not initially present in that particular area, they will have to move out, right? So ultimately, it would lead to more interactions, the negative interactions between humans and wildlife. Now, what is the impact of human-animal conflict? The very first is impact on the wildlife. See, when we are talking about the human-wildlife conflict, we are in fact, and this is natural, that we are looking at the human loss, but also it threatens the very survival of the animals also. Because in many of the situations, what happens is that whenever you have a particular animal coming out in open, then there is this aspect of retaliatory killing. If that particular animal kills, let's say a tiger kills a particular human, right? So there would be this instinct, the human instinct to kill that particular animal. There would be retaliatory killings or preemptive killings. Even if the animal has not killed, you will have a natural tendency to kill the animal first. So it threatens the very survival of the species. Next is impact on the ecosystem. See, this what leads to is the damage of the overall ecosystem. So you have the crops, right? Many farmers have complained that you have these animals who come into their fields and destroy the crops, be it the elephants or be it the other animals, right? So this also affects the predator-prey balance. It basically leads to the situation where this balance is disturbed. Next is impact on social dynamics. There are different stakeholders. For example, we have the farmers who blame the government that you are protecting these animals. Or let's say you have the conservationists who say that these farmers are going for retaliatory killings, this is not good, right? Or let's say you are having the extractive industries, the industries coming and doing the coal mining or something like that, this is not good. So there are issues, there are discord between different stakeholders. Next is impact on the local communities. Ultimately, it is the local community which suffers. There are people who are having their small land holdings, right? And let's say you have a particular animal who comes and destroys their crop. So it leads to poverty, right? And it is ultimately the vulnerable sections of the society who are most affected, right? Vulnerable, poor and marginalized communities. Then it impacts on the commodity production. See, once you will have more instances of these human-wildlife conflict, obviously it would lead to lower production output of different crops, right? And ultimately it would lead to the rise in the prices. There would be an inflationary trend, right? So this is one of the aspects. It decreases their productivity and profitability when we are talking about the businesses involved in the agriculture. Other impacts can be livelihood insecurity, food insecurity, and translocation of animals. Now, what all initiatives have been taken by the government to basically mitigate the human-wildlife conflict? The very first is creation of the protected areas network. We have the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, which basically prescribes for the creation of the national parks, the wildlife sanctuaries, the community reserves, or the conservation areas. So this is one of the ways through which we can protect these animals, right? Specific species specific guidelines. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has come up with certain guidelines for different animals, be it the elephants or be it the other animals. Next is centrally sponsored schemes. We have specific programs, for example, Project Tiger or Project Elephant, with our dedicated funding, which are focusing upon this particular species, right? Their protection and their conservation. So therefore, this is also this aspect. National Wildlife Action Plan of 2017 and 35. Now, this is a very comprehensive plan with respect to the wildlife, right? Starting from 2017 till 2035. It has a chapter with respect to the mitigation of the human-wildlife conflicts. Next is the National Human-Wildlife Conflict Mitigation Strategy Plan from 2021 to 26. Now, this basically ensures the harmonious coexistence and overall well-being of the humans and the animals, right? Tries to provide the ways and means through which we can have a more harmonious existence. What should be the way forward? See, the very first is that we should not look at this particular issue from that of antagonistic aspect, right? We should not just look at this picture and say that the animals are something which are the real issue, right? There has to be this aspect of coexistence. We need to transition from this conflict to the coexistence, right? What we should do is, again, there's a need for having a more holistic approach. We should not just restrict to, let's say, in the impulse of the moment, kill that particular animal. There has to be a proper study, and therefore we should come out with proper guidelines, right? Holistic approach. For example, we have the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, which basically says that the chief wildlife warden in a particular state can basically take any actions which promote the coexistence of humans and wildlife in that particular area. Next is holistic understanding of the conflict. Let's say a particular incident has happened. There has to be a particular study that what is the context, what has been the history, whether this event already happened before or not, right? Or this is something which is recurring, right? So there has to be a proper study, there has to be a proper mapping, and that is really needed. Next we can have barriers, be it the physical barriers. We can have barbed wires, or we can have biofencing. For example, we have the chili which are put, right? So again, different methods can be used, more sustainable methods, so that can act as a barrier between the human habitations and the animals. Next is enabling policy frameworks. We need to have, there are different bodies which have done a lot of research on that. For example, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. It has done a lot of studies, and it says that this aspect of human-wildlife conflict should be integrated into the Sustainable Development Goals, or it should be included into the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, so that we can give adequate importance to it. There can be adequate funding, or there can be adequate technical assistance. Next is role of community. Community-based volunteers or rapid response teams. This should be included, right? This should be instituted. For example, we have different state disaster management authorities. So they can have, in those areas specifically where you see more incidents of such events, there can be the deployment of rapid response teams, so that they are in a better position to control the situation, right? Friends of the wild animals, right? So there has been a program, for example, the Friends of the Wild Animal. So on this line, we can have this particular strategy. Now, what we are trying to say is this issue is something which is really very serious. It compromises not just the life of the humans, but also that those of the animals. So therefore, there's a need of comprehensive strategy. We should not just look at this particular issue from that short-sightedness, and ultimately it leads to the impulsive killing, the retaliatory killing of the animals. We should have a proper research, a holistic study. And again, when we talk about, we need to also think about what humans are doing, right? You are going into their area. You are basically doing this deforestation, and this is destroying their habitations, the habitations of the wildlife, right? For example, the extractive industries, or the linear projects, or the expansion of agriculture. So there has to be a capping to this, right? Again, what we are trying to say is that this is a serious issue, and we need to have a more holistic approach and not just this short-sighted approach. Now, let's have a mains practice question. Human-animal conflict has emerged as a significant challenge in India's conservation efforts, leading to the ecological, economic, and social repercussions. Discuss the causes of human-animal conflict in India and suggest viable strategies for mitigation while ensuring both wildlife conservation and human well-being. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer to this question. So coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about the European Union and the European Commission. So what the article says is that we will have a visit by the President of the European Commission and the 27 commissioners of the European Union to India. Now, why this visit becomes important is because of the stance taken by Mr. Donald Trump. Yes, you heard it right, Mr. Donald Trump. What Mr. Trump is doing is that he is having a very tough stance with respect to Europe. And also, he has not included, he's actually sidelined Europe while he's having his discussion with respect to Russia, right? So he has not included Europe, neither he has included Ukraine, and he's having a direct interaction with Russia. So this has obviously displeased Europe. Moreover, we have discussions taking place on some of the emerging technologies. For example, we recently had the AI Action Summit, right? Even in that particular summit, you had a very tough instance taken by the America with respect to the European policies, right? So in this particular situation, you have the European Commission President and the 27 commissioners of the European Union who are coming to India, and they would definitely discuss upon these aspects, and they would want to know what is India's view on that and how India and EU can increase or strengthen their strategic partnership. So let's go through the article. At a time when the US ties are facing unprecedented strain, European Commission President Ms. Ursula will be in India from 27 to 28 February, along with the 27 commissioners of the European Union, called as the College of Commissioners. This is important. See, in the prelims, what usually happens is they would use these words. So what are they known as? The 27 commissioners of the European Union, they are known as the College of Commissioners. The visit of EU's College of Commissioners, together a member from each of the EU's 27 member countries to India, is first ever. So this becomes very, very important. Next aspect is, the visit was scheduled earlier, but the flurry of events surrounding the US-Russia talks in Riyadh seeking to end the Ukraine war, keeping the Ukraine and Europe out, has brought a sense of urgency and purpose to the visit. Trump's change in the stance to engage directly with Russia has presented a unique set of challenges for Europe. Sources said that the issue is naturally going to be a part of the discussions between PM Modi and the EU chief and her delegation. India has nuanced position on the war, moving from the two parties to the conflict to the parties concerned faced with the new geopolitical reality of the US-Russia talks and the rapidly changing contours of the US-Europe transatlantic alliance. So with respect to these things which are happening, be it with respect to the kind of transitions we are witnessing between US and Europe relations, or the starting of direct engagement between US and Russia, this meeting becomes really important. At the Swiss Peace Conference, India did not sign the joint communique, arguing that Russia was not at the table. Now it remains to see. See, again, India said that Russia is not participating, so we'll not sign. Now it remains to be seen how India negotiates with Russia when Russia is at the table, but Ukraine is not. So this is something which EU would like to see. Issues related to the AI and other tech collaborations are also likely to be discussed following the recent discussions at the AI Action Summit in Paris earlier this month, where Modi and Ms. Ursula were present. India and the EU have been strategic partners since 2004. So always remember, this can be a probable statement in the prelims that whether India or EU are strategic partners. Yes, they are since 2024. Let's also read about what is European Union. So it's basically a political and economic union of 27 member states located primarily in Europe. Then it was established through the Maastricht Treaty, right, which entered into force in 1993. The main goal of EU is to promote cooperation and integration among its different member states in order to enhance the economic and political stability in the Europe, right? So again, it is trying to look at the whole process, the whole situation very comprehensively, including the political aspect, the economic aspect, right? The EU has its own currency, which is used by 19 of its member states. It has single market. This is important. It acts as a single market where you have different goods, services, or capital can move freely. Now, if you look at the chronology, how this European Union came into prominence, so you have the first European Economic Community, EEC, in 1957. This was established by the Treaty of Rome. It aimed to create a common market among its member states and to promote economic growth and cooperation. Next, you had the European Free Trade Association, 1960. It was created to promote free trade and economic integrations between certain countries not in the EEC, that is the European Economic Community. Then first direct elections were held in 1979. Then the launch of Erasmus program. This was important. This was basically to expand to fund university students wishing to study in another European country. Then we had the Maastricht Treaty of 1993. It basically transformed the European community to that of the European Union and expanded the scope, right? And then it not just with respect to the economics, but also included the political, social, and security policies. Then the euro was introduced in 1919, and at that time you had the 11 countries, but now you have 19 countries using it. Then you have the Treaty of Lisbon 2007, aimed to make EU more democratic, efficient, and transparent, and thereby able to tackle the global challenges such as climate change and others. Then Croatia became the 27th EU member in 2013. United Kingdom votes to leave the EU in 2016 in a referendum. So we had the Brexit, right? So ultimately now we have 27 members in the EU, right? The United Kingdom left EU in 2020. Now, there are different pillars of governance in the European Union, right? So there are four main decision-making institutions in the European Union administration. The first is European Council. Now this is made up of the heads of the state or the government of the European member states. Then what the overall objective is, it sets the EU's overall political agenda or direction. European Commission, the European Commission is the executive branch of the EU. So if there's a statement directly that European Commission acts as the executive branch of the EU, it is absolutely correct. European Parliament, the European Parliament is directly elected legislative body of the European Union. Council of the EU. Now this is a main decision-making body of the European Union, represents the interests of the member states and is responsible for adopting the legislation and coordinating policies. Now alongside these bodies, you have other bodies also, complemented by other institutions. For example, you have the Court of Justice of the European Union, acts as a Supreme Court of the European Union, ensures that the European Union law is interpreted and applied in a consistent manner. Then you have the European Central Bank, quite famous, responsible for keeping the prices. Again, it deals with the monetary policy aspect, make sure that there is the adequate importance to the price stability and growth. European Court of Auditors contributes to improving the EU financial management and acts as independent guardian of the financial interests of the EU citizens. Now, let's also talk about the European Commission, right? So, European Commission is the executive body we've just studied of the European Union. It's responsible for representing the EU's common interests. Headquarters are in Brussels, Belgium. Roles, there are different roles, for example, proposing new laws and policies, managing the EU budget. Then you have ensuring the correct application of EU laws and policies. Then you have negotiating the international agreement. Composition, it is led by a president. So we have Ms. Ursula and 27 commissioners known as the college, who together make the decisions of the commission's political and strategic direction. Again, this is the appointment process and this is the tenure, appointed after every 5 years. So just have a track of this, because again, in the prelims, there can be a probable question with respect to the composition or the mandate of the European Union, the members, what was the treaty which established it, or you can have a question with respect to European Commission, because you have a very strong delegation which is supposed to visit India very soon. So this is with respect to this particular article. Let's go to the other article. Coming to the next article, we have a very important news coming from the corridors of power, that Shaktikant Das, former RBI governor, is now appointed as the principal secretary to the Prime Minister. Now, this becomes really important because UPSC has had a tendency of asking questions with respect to important officials in the governance process. So this becomes really important. Now, what you must know is that Shaktikant Das is a person who was the RBI governor during the most crucial times of the COVID period, was responsible for taking a lot of policy initiatives, is very close to the government, has done a lot in the government, right? Was the finance secretary at one point of time. So this becomes quite important. And see, if a person is now being appointed as a principal secretary to the Prime Minister, this position itself is very important. Reason being that this status is equal to, that is, the principal secretary to the Prime Minister is equal to that of a cabinet minister. And he or she directly influences or gives the inputs, policy inputs to the Prime Minister, who is the center of the overall governance, right? So this becomes really important. Probably a question can be asked with respect to the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister. So former Reserve Bank of India Governor Shaktikant Das has now been appointed as the Principal Secretary second to the Prime Minister. Now this is also important. What you must know is that at present we have two Principal Secretaries to the Prime Minister. We have Mr. P.K. Mishra, who was earlier the additional Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister. Then he was promoted and he became the Principal Secretary. Now in addition to Mr. P.K. Mishra, we have Shaktikant Das also, right? Appointments committee of the cabinet has made this decision clear. Mr. Das was the RBI governor from 2018 till 24 when the Indian economy faced a lot of uncertainties because of COVID-19 pandemic. Prime Minister's office bolstering. His appointment is being seen as the Prime Minister's office is bolstering his financial management expertise in the uncertain geoeconomic situation. So what you must know that he played a very important role in the finance ministry. Then he was the RBI governor. So his policy inputs would be very crucial for the government, because right now what we are witnessing, especially when we talk about the stance taken by Mr. Trump, it is affecting the overall global trade, right? And therefore, it is also shaking up the geo-economic situation. And this position, his appointment becomes quite crucial. As I told you that we have Mr. P.K. Mishra, who was earlier serving as the additional principal secretary. And right now we have two principal secretaries, Mr. Shaktikant Das and Mr. P.K. Mishra. Now, let's talk about this particular position. Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister is the administrative head of the Prime Minister's office. So just understand, we already know that PMO is something which is now becoming the center of power. And if a particular official is the principal secretary, is the administrative head of the PMO, obviously a very powerful position, a very responsible position too. The office holder is generally a retired civil servant, most commonly from the Indian Administrative Service and sometimes also from Indian Foreign Service. For example, we had Mr. Brijesh Mishra. Since 2019, the office holder has been accorded with the status of a cabinet minister. Please do remember these things. A question can be directly asked in the exam that what is the equivalent position? So it is equivalent to that of a cabinet minister, and the office holder ranks 7th in the order of the precedence. Now, what are the main functions of the principal secretary? The very first is advising the Prime Minister on key domestic or foreign policy matters. Not just restricted to domestic, but also foreign policy matters. What ideally should be done in this particular situation, right? Overseeing the affairs of the ministries and departments which are assigned by the Prime Minister. Then coordinating the activities in the Prime Minister's office, dealing with the officials, government, important paperwork in the PMO, then preparing the notes on the issues to be discussed by the Prime Minister with senior politicians, be it the cabinet ministers, other cabinet ministers, bureaucrats and other dignitaries, placing before the Prime Minister critical files of importance for approval and instruction. So very, very important position. The Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister is generally considered the latter's most crucial eyed, right? So very, very important position. Keep a track. What are the functions and what is the status equivalent to? There can be a probable question in the prelims. Let's go to the other article. So coming to the next article, this is with respect to the Accessible India campaign, what we call as Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan. Now, this article says that we have a particular report by the Comptroller and Auditor General, and this report has highlighted that the CPWD, the Central Public Works Department, did not conduct a pre-access audit of different buildings. So this tells us two things. The very first is the power of CAG to basically examine the functioning of different bodies. And then the second is that what is the importance of this Accessible India campaign? What is this campaign all about? So let's go through this. The CAG has found in a draft report that the Central Public Works Department, CPWD, did not conduct the pre-access audit in around 80% of the old central government buildings examined by it before retrofitting them to make them accessible for the persons with disabilities, right? So what the process is that we have the CPWD, which is trying to retrofit different government buildings so as to make it more accessible for the persons with disabilities. But it had to conduct the pre-access audit, which it did not do. Under the Union government's Accessible India campaign launched in 2015, at least 50% of the all government buildings in the national capital and state capitals were to be made fully accessible to persons with disabilities by June 2022. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has issued the harmonized guidelines and standards for the universal accessibility in India 2016 and 2021. The CPWD has taken up the work to retrofit the existing buildings as per the guidelines which are issued by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. These guidelines have been made mandatory and are being complied with in all the new buildings being constructed by the CPWD. Now, what is this Accessible India campaign? See, also known as Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan. Now, this is a particular mission to reshape India into a truly inclusive society. That is, we are making these public offices, public places more accessible for the people with disabilities, right? Again, the very objective of the scheme is to ensure the universal accessibility across three vital domains. The first is built infrastructure, second is transport system, third is information and communication technology. So just don't think that it is restricted to the built infrastructure. It also includes the transport systems and the ICT systems, information and communication technology. Now, India is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, had committed to creating an accessible environment for the persons with disabilities. Yet, prior to 2015, efforts lacked a comprehensive and a more cohesive strategy. The Persons with Disabilities Act 1995, though welfare-oriented, did not adequately address the accessibility aspects, right? And therefore, recognizing this gap, we had the Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan was launched to bring the accessibility to the forefront of the national development. So the next aspect is that initially we had planned to conclude this particular campaign by March 2024. But now what we have done is we have tried to include the campaign's objectives into the creation of barrier-free environment scheme under the broader umbrella scheme of Scheme for the Implementation of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, SIBDA. This transition reinforces the idea that accessibility is a continuous endeavor requiring sustained efforts to meet the evolving challenges. So there can be a probable question in the prelims which talks about the very objectives of the scheme, right? So do remember, have a reading and you can solve the question. Let's go to the other article. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the very important Eklavya Model Residential School. So we have a particular body which is known as the National Education Society for the Tribal Students. This has come up with a circular saying that we will include English as a medium of instruction from class 9th from the next session, right? So this becomes really important. Let's go through the article. After multiple representations from the students of the EMRS, Eklavya Model Residential Schools, the National Education Society for the Tribal Students, we look into what this body is all about, has issued a circular introducing English medium of instructions in all EMRS from classes 9th, beginning from the next academic session, that is from 25-26. The EMRS, now this itself is given in the article what is the very objective of EMRS, had been set up by the government to provide quality education to the students belonging to the scheduled tribes. Do remember, these statements can be asked in the prelims. While Eklavya schools in states like Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh and West Bengal and some other schools in Chhattisgarh say that they have been following English medium, those in that of the Rajasthan, Gujarat, Jharkhand and Uttar Pradesh are using Hindi as a medium of instruction. Nest said that it was introducing the English medium of instruction across such schools so as to bring the uniformity and to enhance the academic standards and professional prospects of all the EMRS students. It will help them to better prepare for the competitive exams and broaden their access to universities in India and abroad where English remains the primary language for instruction. So they have been facing a barrier, the students from the EMRS, though they're well educated, but they're facing barriers because many of the higher education institutes or even some profession require the mandatory knowledge of English. So therefore, this is something which is a step in the right direction. This is also in keeping with the government's stated objective of developing Eklavya schools along the lines of Navodaya Vidyalayas, right? So just have a look of what these schools are all about. EMRS were started in 1997-98 to impart quality education to the ST children in remote areas to enable them access the best opportunities in the education and bring at par them with the general population. They're established in the states and UTs from the grants received under Article 275. Do remember, so they are working, they're actually being run through the grants received under Article 275. They are co-ed residential schools. They are co-ed residential schools, do remember, from classes 6 to 12th. Eklavya schools will be on par with Navodaya Vidyalayas and will have special facilities for preserving the local art and culture, besides providing training in sports and skill development. Each school has a capacity of almost 480 students with equal number of seats for boys and girls. Non-ST students, so if there's a statement that it completely bars the entry of non-ST students, this is incorrect. Non-ST students can be admitted in the schools up to 10% of the total seats. CBSE curriculum is followed in these schools and education is completely free, very important. The National Education Society for Tribal Students, what we just studied, which has come up with a particular circular, is an autonomous organization, has been set up under the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, autonomous organization under the Ministry of Tribal Affairs to establish and manage the AMRS across the country. Very, very important. As per the budget, now this is an old data, 2018-19, every block with more than 50% of the ST population and at least 20,000 tribal population will have an EMRS by the year 2022. So this is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Let's go to the last article. So coming to the last article of the day, this is with respect to the Confederation of Indian Industry. So we have the CII chief, who has emphasized upon the need of having the robust job creation and having more skilled workforce. One of the very important aspects which he has spoken about is that there is the more and more incorporation of services in the manufacturing sector. Yes, you heard it right. That we are including more and more number of services in the manufacturing. There's more integration of technology in the manufacturing. So what we need to have that kind of workforce which can basically cater to this transition. Right? So this workforce should be capable with respect to different technologies, be it the AI, be it the automation, be it the robotics. So this is what you have to basically understand. Now, CII becomes very important. Whenever we are talking about CII, one word which comes to mind is the pressure groups, right? So we have different kinds of pressure groups. The very objective of pressure group is to influence the government decision. Without being directly part of the government, they influence the government decisions. Business groups there can be different business groups, there can be agriculture groups. One of the prime examples of business pressure groups in India is CII, Confederation of Indian Industries. So just we'll go through it, right, taken from the website itself. So this CII works to create and sustain an environment conducive to the development of India, partnering with different industries, government, and civil society. Now, this is a non-government, very important. See, a statement can be there in the prelims, right? So just focus upon this. It's a non-government, not-for-profit, industry-led, industry-managed organization with around 9,000 members from the private as well as public sectors. So it is not just restricted to the private sectors. Also, we have participation from the public sectors, including small and medium enterprises, multinational companies, and indirect membership of over 365,000 enterprises from 294 national and regional sectoral industry bodies. Now, CII charts change by working closely with the government on policy issues, interfacing with thought leaders, and enhancing the efficiency, competitiveness, and business opportunities for industry through a range of specialized services. Through its dedicated Center of Excellence and Industry Competitiveness initiatives, promotion of innovation and technology adoption, partnerships for sustainability, CII plays a transformative part in shaping the future of nation. So it interacts with various industries, comes to the conclusion that what are the various needs of different industries, and then basically gives that particular information, gives that input to the government, right? For 2024-25, CII has identified the globally competitive India, partnerships for sustainable and inclusive growth as its theme, prioritizing 5 key pillars. During the year, it would align its initiative and activities to facilitate strategic interactions for driving India's global competitiveness and growth through a robust and resilient Indian industry. Again, one thing is very important, that it has many offices with 70 offices, including 12 centers of excellence in India and 8 overseas offices. So it also has different overseas offices in Australia, Egypt, Germany, Indonesia, Singapore, UAE, UK, and USA, as well as institutional partnerships with almost 300 counterpart organizations. That is the same organizations, the organizations which are doing the same work in different countries. In almost 100 countries, CII serves as a reference point for the Indian industry and international business community. Very important, there can be a question with respect to this particular pressure group in the prelims. So here we come at the end of the session. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the very best. Thank you so much.